Hey everybody, Dan Mobley, principal at Aquaterra Outdoors, and I am here with my good buddy Bill Bauer, founder, owner, principal of the Garden Design Studio. They've got offices in Dallas and in Austin, and Bill and I, we've known each other for 15 years now. Thanks for being a part of this, Bill.
Thank you for having me.
So curious, from a entrepreneurial but also love of landscape architecture, things like that, how did you kind of start off on your journey in the industry?
Well, it wasn't linear. I remember being a kid, and my earliest memories of thinking about what you might want to do, even as a little kid. I always wanted to be an architect. That was from the get-go. And naively, I applied to one school only because I thought, oh, I want to go to UT in Austin, and I'll just apply there, not thinking for a minute that I may not get accepted, or maybe I should have looked at other options. So that was always my dream, to be an architect, go to UT in Austin. So they had much lower standards apparently, because I snuck in and got my degree in architecture. And this was early 90s. So Austin was a very different place at that time. And I kind of fell into a part-time job as a draftsman for a landscape architect. Wound up working there for 13 years before I started my own in 2006.
Where do you typically draw your kind of creative juices from?
It's kind of from everywhere, honestly. Like, I'd love to say I'm a big traveler and I go to all these great places and steal ideas from, wherever, but it's a mixed bag, right? It's looking at magazines, it's looking at other people's work, it's looking at architecture, art. It's looking at art. My wife and I are big antique collectors, so it's something as random and on the surface unassociated can be inspiring, right? You see these hand carved pieces, so it's a craft, right? So you can find it in really unexpected places. I feel like it doesn't always have to be, I'm going to go on a trip to Italy and look at all these amazing gardens. It can often be something much more kind of um, everyday occurrences.
What were some things on the client wish list that they really wanted, and then what were some areas where they allowed you to take some creative liberties?
The client wish list was fairly straightforward. They didn't have a huge front yard, and obviously with all of this, the view and everything else, they clearly were going to live back here. But the main thing on the client side was really a place to entertain, have a pool, big outdoor dining and entertaining areas, family areas, and all those things require a nice big level area. And of course, as we've already talked about, we were operating on a cliff. So uh, trying to make this all work in the context of that environment was a challenge, but that was their main goal, was to be able to build on this lot, even though it was very sloped and challenging, but have a large enough level area to feel like a backyard, even though it's elevated. In terms of all the landscape pieces, this was the thing that was most important to the client.
So we've talked about this project in particular and kind of the design process of it, how that all went with the client. What is Bill Bauer, your favorite feature of this project?
Well, it'd be easy to say that, because I think that's most people would walk out here and they immediately, their eyes go to the pool. And that's, like we talked about, that's kind of where the family lives and entertains and is probably the most used and one of the more exciting parts of this, to be out here. But honestly, for me, it's the atrium piece. And it's not a place anybody's ever going to hang out, probably. But to me, the reason is it for me really feels like a perfect marriage of architecture and landscape architecture. That to me was the most exciting component of this, because you don't get to work in a space like that very often. It's a challenging space. There's a lot that goes into it, but it is surrounded by and incorporated into the architecture in a way that even something like this, as integrated as this is, it's still different.
Well, I think it's cool that the whole kind of house is centered around that space. And even though I think you may have been downplaying a little bit of the impact that that space has, just you've got all the glass around it, you've got the steel around it, but then you have this awesome, huge, full, thick blocks of stone that make up. So it's kind of that juxtaposition of the natural and the man-made, whereas this feels very serene and natural, and it's surrounded by something very artful and architecture, heavy on the architecture, I guess.
Right, right. There's a symbolism there, I suppose, too, in that you mentioned the blocks. Like that was very intentional as well, to try to have something that was reminiscent of what was here before, which it's hard to imagine now when somebody comes here, but this was a cliff. I mean, it was a very sloped site, very rugged, and so a typical two-piece step with smooth edges just didn't feel right. So that again just goes back to like little details like that and the things you try to think through so that the ruggedness of those stones compared to the cleanliness and of all the steel and glass, like hopefully there's a good tension there that people perceive.
Honestly, a very good way to kind of bring it full circle is just what you said in the beginning of how people usually think landscape architecture is come put some shrubs around my home, but there was a cliff here before. So those big blocks are symbolic of the cliff before. Do they look cool? Yes. Are they even cooler now that everybody knows that? Probably.
Yes.
You know? Well, I'm going to say it is.
Definitely.
Yes. Bill, thank you so much. Always a pleasure sitting down talking to you.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Absolutely.